Roberto, for much of your career, you went to school in San Diego, both for undergrad and grad school. San Diego has been sometimes called the most northern city in Mexico. How important is San Diego to Mexican culture, the immigrant tradition, immigrant life? How important is San Diego for that?
Well, San Diego was, I guess, 30, 40 years ago. Now you find Mexicans, New York, Alaska, Hawaii, just about everywhere.
Was it different 34 years ago?
Oh, well, I think it's been there for more than 100 years, you know. This used to be part of Mexico.
I guess specifically from the perspective, sure, but from the perspective of immigration, with the war with Mexico, there was suddenly a wall where there had been one nation.
Yes. In fact, right after the Mexican Revolution, there were only 15 million Mexicans in Mexico. Now there are more than 100 million. So you're right. In terms of numbers, it has increased, but you have a Mexican community in Texas, in Colorado, in New Mexico. We've been there hundreds of years. Now, in California, I'm from Jalisco, from Guadalajara, and we migrated to Tijuana in the 1940s. Tijuana was only 80,000 people. I lived there, and we used to listen to radio from San Diego, then television from San Diego. Tijuana had a channel 12, one channel on television that nobody watched. We watched always television from the other side, el otro lado de la línea. So even though we didn't understand English, I did not understand it, but I grew up listening to it. It came through some kind of cultural osmosis. Also, we would cross the border. Mexico wanted us to buy products from Mexico. Consumir lo que el país produce, to consume what the country produces. Nobody paid attention to that. We would cross the border and buy just about everything across the border. So when the Mexican peso lost its value in 1976 and went from 12.50 to 22 with the first big devaluation, you know who's the first one that felt the crisis? San Diego, San Isidro, because many Mexicans could not go and cross to buy products. They wanted Mexicans to cross the border to buy things.
Now, for the record,
Yes.
if it was 80,000 when you moved there, the city today is...
No, yeah, Tijuana was 80,000. And then when I came to UCLA to do my doctorate in 1970, it was about 250,000. I kept going back. I have friends. I have all my family in Guadalajara, a lot of my friends in Tijuana. And every time I would go back, it was a different city. It was growing up. At one point, I heard there was 1 million people in Tijuana. I could not believe it. When we moved to Tijuana, I had neighbors from Oaxaca, neighbors from Sonora, neighbors from Veracruz. I said, wow, Mexico is so different regions. Even the way they talk. And I think that's when I became Mexican, when I got to Tijuana. I had an image of the nation. In terms of the border, I think there's something else. And those of us who have lived, not on a border, but on a frontier, we know there's such a thing as a frontier culture. There's something about frontiers around the world that are energizing, are places of innovation. When we got to Tijuana, I met people who had all these dreams. They were walking as if with helium, you know? They wanted to just gravitate and reach for their goals. The notion that there's an American sense of the frontier is too provincial. People around the world have a sense of the frontier, and you must live it. And I lived it in Tijuana. That's where suddenly you leave Mexico behind, and you don't quite understand what's on the other side of the border, but you know that in that frontier, there's an exchange. I used to see people from the United States going to Tijuana to go to the bullfights, to buy curios from Tijuana, to get drunk in Tijuana. You know, the sailors used to go there on weekends. I had an idea about Americans, you know. There was some kind of schizoid. That on the other side of the border, you know, they're law-abiding, we're quiet. But once they go into Mexico, they go wild. Like Ambrose Bierce in Carlos Fuentes, you know, old gringo. You know, he goes to Mexico to die. Some of these kids used to go to Tijuana just to get drunk.
And never
and
found
get
him.
into fights.
Yeah, and never found him.
And you see people coming across the border. And then one day you go into San Isidro, San Diego, and then you admire the landscapes, There's so much water everywhere. It's beautiful. You go back to Tijuana, it's dusty, and you begin to get paranoid. The gringos got all the water. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
You cross the border, my God. Even the highways and freeways, the trees and the plants. It's great. So there's a sense of admiration, a sense of, you don't understand the other side of the border, but you understand the frontier experience. The borders are for nations and map makers. Frontiers are for people who live it. Yeah, and I think that for as long as people don't go into another country, even though they live in Los Angeles or New York or Paris, they remain provincial. They must get out of their city. I tell my students, even though you're in Los Angeles, metropolitan center, you must leave LA. Go somewhere else. And to deprovincialize yourself. You come back, you're marked for life. You'll never be the same. Yeah. It happens to all of us who migrate.
When we talk about immigrant literature, we're talking both about literature written by immigrants and literature about immigrants. What are the themes that distinguish these two threads of thinking?
I think that when I look into Chicano, Mexican American, Mexican, Latin American literature that deals with the frontier, that deals with immigration, we are part of that moment, great moment in history of humanity of convergence.
Do you sense that this theme of immigration resonates the same in Mexico as it does in the US? I imagine in Mexico, for example, it's seen as optimism, hope for the future, some way of helping the family, whereas in the US it's often looked at as just barely this side of the law, that people are considered illegal, and it's a tough life here, as we've seen in a lot of literature. What is the impression, what is the place of immigration in the mind and mentality of Mexico?
I think in this country there are two major sides to it. One is the side that I have embraced as an immigrant and now as a citizen, a person that I have 3 children in this country, who are born in this country, who are American, and I'm here to stay because I have a family here. And the America that I have embraced is, I think, that America that was there from the beginning. It's an America that was open, innovative, a country with imagination, a country with optimism. We live, ideas incarnate in people. You know, there's the incarnation of ideas in us that move us in life, goals that we set for ourselves, what we like to be tomorrow, you know. And that's one thing that I discovered in the frontier. Now there's the other, also America, very provincial, very narrow, only protecting its own interests. The hell with the interests of anybody else. America number 1, you know. And I think that America has no future. It makes a lot of enemies. Horrible foreign policy, supporting fascist governments. You know, it's not going to work. It has to set an example, the other America, that invites people to reach for their better selves. Countries who admire the United States around the world. Yes, when President Obama became president, people around the world were just amazed. Look at the changes in the United States. It's great. So the frontier is a place where you not only are open to differences, but you begin to question the way you were brought up, the way you were raised, that internal frontier, that there's some things that limit me, and there's some things I want to change in me. And I think that happens when you're exposed to another language, another culture, another way of life. In Mexico, in Tijuana, if you went to Mexico City to study, that meant that your parents had money. You had to come from wealth. Those of us with a working class background, our parents had to get us a green card. And then for us to work in this country. And then for us to come here to university. My first job in the United States was in a farm, picking tomatoes. I was 14 years old. I say that with pride. Now, I didn't have to work in a farm. But my parents told me, we're going to have you work in a farm. This way, you're going to hate it so much that you're going to go to school because you don't want to end up working with your hands. And they were so right. That's the hardest job I've ever had. And I was paid 65 cents an hour in San Isidro. And then what happens? You start thinking of going to college. When I went to college, I wanted to major in microbiology because I thought it was so cool to have, a white apron.
White lab coat.
After working in the fields, to have a microscope. I told the whole my family in Guadalajara. They admire me. I went to school and I hardly could speak English, I think this country has to learn other languages. It's a world power. It has to encourage the learning of other languages. I go to Europe. I have friends from Asia, of Latin America. In fact, in Europe, if you speak only one language, they think you're mentally retarded. You got to speak more than 3 or 4 languages. Some people today are not modern because there's no sense of memory. The past is still alive, and the present that continues to escape from our grasp. Local villages around the world, especially in Latin America, have a lot to contribute, which is that modernity, this emphasis on innovation and change, for it to have some kind of anchoring on the world and reality and life, it must retain some kind of memory of the past, of worthwhile cultures. In Latin America, he mentions how it is that we have grown up with people from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, and Native America. That our national cultures are congruent with our nation. Our sense of justice is not. We have to achieve democracy as an institution in Latin America.
Roberto, to wind our conversation up, and clearly we could go on forever, is this sense of modernity, frontera, optimism, future, is that felt differently in different parts of the world, or do you think that's pretty universal?
We have to account for nations going through development based on their own history, based on their own resources, based on their own ethos. So there's a Brazilian modernity, there's an Indian modernity, there's a Chinese modernity, no longer patterned after the West, that is its own industrial revolution, its own enlightenment. It had to grab resources from the world, copper and oil and whatever. Now it's different. So I think that there's a minority of people around the world who more or less experience modernity, that is technology. Modernity can mean a lot of things, and not just an attitude. I made reference to it as an attitude, but also it's technology itself and how you use it and how it connects you to other people. But a lot of the people around the world don't have access to it. So I would say, just by a hunch, that most of the globe still lives, according to tradition. It's going to take a while. It might be in this century that people catch up. Yeah.
Mr. Le Corbusier.